The road was dust that never settled. It hung in the morning air like the memory of something lost, curling through brittle sagebrush and over the dry bones of fence posts long since given up to time. A wagon creaked slowly through it, drawn by a pair of tired mules and guided by a man who didn't speak much anymore. The sun had just begun its slow rise behind him, casting the world in amber and silence. Elias Hart kept his eyes on the trail ahead. He had no use for dreams these days. The land barely held together beneath him. The roof on the barn leaned east like it wanted to collapse in peace. The well was running shallower with each passing week, and the cows didn't even try to bellow anymore. Everything that used to make noise had grown quiet, like it had learned from him. He wasn't headed to town for comfort. He wasn't headed there for hope. It was the livestock sale, and word had it a few maras might go for cheap. Sickly maybe, but he'd nursed worse back to strength. You didn't survive out here by waiting for what you wanted. You made do with what was left. When he reached the yard, there was already a loose ring of men circling the pens. Cigarettes burned low between lips that hadn't smiled in years. Elias stepped down and tied the reins. The dust clung to his boots like guilt. The auction was halfway through when it happened. Not the way you'd expect. There was no shout, no surprise. Just a pause. The kind that makes the wind forget how to move. She was standing beside the fence, hands bound loosely in front of her with rope that looked more symbolic than necessary. The man beside her wore a sheriff's star and a face like rotted wood. A voice, flat and distant, read something about a court ruling, behavior unfit for traditional employment, debts owed for damage and disorder. She was being sold. No one moved. Not because they didn't understand, but because they did. The girl, maybe 18, maybe 20, stared out past them all like they weren't even there. Her hair long and dark, tangled in the wind like wild oats. Her face was sun-bronzed, not soft, but something else, something unmoved. The blue dress she wore hung too loose on her frame. One sleeve was torn. She didn't blink. The sheriff cleared his throat and tried again. Branded too wild for domestic service, he muttered. Property of the territory until claimed. The words hung like oil on water. A man in a brown vest chuckled, spat, and muttered something about trouble not being worth the rope that tied her. Another said he didn't need something that stared at him like that. One by one, they backed away. Elias didn't know when he raised his hand. It just lifted. A breath moved through the crowd like someone finally exhaled. The sheriff nodded once. Papers were shoved in Elias's direction, thin and smudged. The rope was dropped from her wrists without ceremony. She still hadn't spoken. She walked toward him like the ground might disappear beneath her feet, slow but straight. Her eyes didn't leave his face. She passed within an arm's length and paused at the edge of his wagon. Still silent. He climbed up first. She followed. They rode away with the morning sun behind them, two silhouettes swallowed slowly by distance. He didn't ask her name. He didn't know what he'd bought. The trail back to the ranch was long, rough with ridges and stones that jarred the wheels at every turn. She didn't flinch, didn't shift. She sat still like a photograph. When the mules slowed to drink at the creek, Elias climbed down and offered her a canteen. She took it with both hands, drank, and handed it back. No words, just a quiet nod. He noticed, only then, how bruised her knuckles looked. Not the kind from falling. The kind that came from striking things that struck back. By the time the ranch appeared on the horizon, the sun had tipped toward afternoon. The fields were brown, long since surrendered to drought. Fence lines sagged with age. The barn door moaned when it opened. Still, it was home, such as it was. He led her to the small bunkhouse, barely more than a shack with a cot and stove. Inside, dust motes danced in the stale air, and the floor creaked in complaint. She walked in without hesitation and stood in the center like she was trying to feel its edges. No complaint. No thanks. Elias stood in the doorway for a long moment. "If you want to leave, I won't stop you," he said finally, voice dry as cedar bark. "Ain't nobody gonna chase you here." She turned to face him. There was something in her eyes then. Not gratitude, not fear. Just something that had outlived both. "I ain't running," she said. It was the first time he heard her voice. Soft, flat. Tired in a way that didn't come from the body. He nodded once, then left her to the silence. That night, the wind rolled over the plains like a hymn hummed through teeth. Elias sat on the porch of the main house with a tin cup and the weight of everything he didn't understand pressing on his chest. She hadn't asked for food. Hadn't appeared since the door closed behind her. he should have felt relief. Instead, there was a strange stillness in him. Not comfort, not unease, just stillness. Like the house, the land, even his own tired soul, had been waiting for a sound that finally arrived. And it wasn't her voice. It was her presence. Somewhere just past the barn, an owl called into the open dark. Elias sipped his coffee, cold now, and watched the stars emerge one by one like slow confession. He didn't know what tomorrow held, but he knew the girl in the bunkhouse wasn't the one those men tried to sell. And somehow, he knew she was meant to be here. Not owned, not tamed, just seen. The wind rustled the tall grass like a whisper that hadn't found words yet. He sat there long after the coffee ran dry, and the world turned quiet again. The days began without fanfare. Dawn seeped slow across the brittle earth, casting long shadows that stretched like scars from the barns to the broken fence line. The ranch breathed in that quiet way dying things sometimes do, no longer fighting, just waiting to be remembered. Calla rose before the rooster most mornings. Elias never asked her to. He never gave orders. But each day, without word or glance, she moved through the land as if it whispered to her in a language she hadn't spoken in years but had never forgotten. She fed the hens, shoveled stalls, repaired the rotted corner of the henhouse with wire, and which she found piled behind the tool shed. She moved like someone who didn't expect to stay but refused to leave things broken while she was near. Elias noticed. Not through watching, exactly, he wasn't that kind of man. But he noticed the fences mended where they hadn't been. Noticed the animals calm where once they'd skittishly eyed the sky. Noticed that, somehow, things were quieter when she was near, not because she said little, but because her silence felt chosen, not imposed. She never asked for more than what was already there. Took her meals in the corner of the kitchen, unless he left it on the bunkhouse stoop, in which case it disappeared without sound. She didn't ask about his past, and he didn't dare ask about hers. There was something unspoken between them that made words feel clumsy. He remembered the first time he caught her singing, soft, almost inaudible, like a memory escaping through her throat. She was brushing down his old gelding, the one no rider had touched in months, and he was letting her. Letting her. That horse had nearly thrown a man once for coughing too loud. She hummed to him like the tune had always been meant for horses, not people. Elias had stood behind the barn door, caught in the fragile stillness of it, afraid that even breathing would chase it away. It wasn't beauty he noticed in her, not in the way the townsfolk whispered about. No, it was something sturdier, something rooted. She carried herself like she'd already seen the worst of the world and decided not to bend for it. Not out of pride, but principle. The town, of course, had noticed her too. Martha Bell was the first to speak of it, as she always was. A widow with sharp eyes and a mouth made for warnings. She stopped Elias on his rare trip in for nails and grain, leaning across the mercantile counter with hands that had long ago stopped trembling. "That girl," she said like it tasted bitter. "She rides alone, with no one watching. That kind of woman turns the earth under her feet." Elias didn't answer, just stared past her to the wall of dry goods. She clicked her tongue. "Not saying she's wrong for breathing, but don't be fooled. She's not meant to stay." He loaded the supplies without a word and drove home slow. Dust swirled behind the wagon like ghosts still trying to follow him. The next morning, he saw Calla saddling the mare. His mare, the one she'd been brushing like an old friend. She moved with ease, as if the animal had chosen her. He stepped out onto the porch just as she mounted, bareback, legs hugging the horse like a second skin. "Use skin permission," he said, voice quiet, more curious than stern. She turned, the light behind her casting her hair like a halo of fire. Her expression didn't change, but something about it softened. "No," she said, "but I'll give it back." And then she rode. Not with the fear of someone who'd been forbidden it. Not like someone fleeing either. She rode like someone reclaiming breath. The wind took to her like it knew her rhythm. The horse, once stubborn and stiff, moved like it remembered being wild. Elias didn't follow, just watched. Watched until they disappeared over the ridge. Then he went to mend a gate that didn't need mending. His hands worked without direction. His thoughts didn't. She returned before dusk, sweat at her temples, dust streaking her hem. Said nothing as she unsaddled the mare, brushed her down, fed her oats. He offered no questions. The silence between them was not tension. It was trust. But not everyone understood silence the same way. The knock came 2 days later. Heavy, practiced official. The kind of knock that had words behind it before the door even opened. A tall man in a long coat stood on the porch. The wind didn't stir his hat. His voice was smooth, rehearsed. "Judge Marin," he said, extending a hand Elias didn't take. Elias didn't move to let him in. "She's still here?" the man asked. "The girl. Calla May." Elias said nothing. The judge continued, unbothered by silence. "She's government property. Sold under public order due to repeated offenses, disorderly conduct, refusal of domestic placement, vagrancy, and willful resistance. That last one's the one they hated most." Calla stepped out of the barn just then, wiping her hands on her skirt. She didn't stop walking until she stood beside Elias. She didn't look at the judge. Marin smiled the way snakes do. "Miss May, I figured you'd burn through this place, just like the last one. Or maybe he thinks he's special. That'll be different this time." Calla tilted her head slightly, but said nothing. Elias took one slow breath. "She's not yours anymore." "She never was," Marin said. "Just something wild we tried to break. Territory, law gives me the right to reclaim her. I've got papers." Elias stepped down onto the porch boards. "Then take it up with God. 'Cause you'll get nothing from me." The judge narrowed his eyes. "You understand you're interfering with a legal matter." "I understand I bought a person once and regretted it the second I saw her look back at me like she wasn't afraid of hell. I'm not making that mistake again." Calla's eyes never moved. Her voice, when it came, was low and even. "You made me property," she said to the judge, "but you never owned me." Marin's mouth twitched. "You'll regret this." "Maybe," Elias said, "but not today." The judge turned, coat snapping in the wind, and rode off without another word. That night, Elias sat again on the porch, same tin cup in hand. Calla approached, boots scuffing the steps before settling down beside him. He didn't look at her. Just said, "You could leave now. I wouldn't stop you." "I know," she said. They sat there for a long time, watching the stars come back like they'd just remembered where they belonged. A breeze passed between them, cool and curious. "Why didn't you fight him?" Elias asked finally. "I did," she said, "by not letting him see it." He nodded, though he didn't fully understand. But some things didn't need understanding, just tending. The porch creaked. The night deepened, and the soil beneath their feet, parched, hardened, waiting, held still. As if it, too, was learning the shape of something new. Something like roots. It happened the way seasons shift on the plains, quiet, slow, not with thunder but with stillness. You don't see it until the wind changes, and suddenly, nothing feels the same. Calla started humming again. Not every day. Not for long. But now and then, when the sun was low and her hands were buried in feed or flax, a tune would curl from her throat like breath from warm water. Something old. Something her mother might have taught her before the world taught her different. Elias heard it one morning while mending the plow yoke. The song drifted from the corral where she stood brushing down a calf that had lost its mother last winter. He didn't move. Just let it wash over him, wondering if healing sounded like that. She didn't notice him watching. It had been 6 weeks since the judge came. 6 weeks, and she hadn't left. Not even wandered. Each day, she worked like the land owed her nothing but breath. Some nights she cooked. Not much, simple bread, a pot of beans, sometimes a roasted squash with thyme she'd found growing behind the barn. When she served it, she didn't wait to be thanked. But Elias said thank you anyway. Something had shifted between them. Not with words, but with nearness. A glance that lingered. A silence that no longer felt empty. The way she handed him a tool without asking. The way he left the porch light burning just a little longer after supper. Still, she never spoke of where she came from. And he didn't ask. One afternoon, after a storm had rolled through, Elias went to the old north fence. It had collapsed again. Wind had a way of remembering weakness. He expected to find broken slats and tangled wire. Instead, he found her. Calla stood in the wreckage barefoot, mud smeared up her calves, hair wet with rain. In her hands, she held a half-built post, wedged deep into the softened earth. She'd done it without tools, just strength and instinct. When she saw him, she smiled, not with her mouth, but with her eyes. A quiet smile, one that said, "I didn't wait for you to fix it. I knew how." He felt it then, not admiration, not gratitude, but recognition. She wasn't someone he needed to protect. She was someone he could stand beside. That night, when the lamps were low, Elias pulled out a bottle he hadn't touched in years. Poured 2 fingers into a glass, hesitated, then poured another for her. He carried both to the bunkhouse. She opened the door before he knocked. Neither spoke as she stepped aside to let him in. The fire in the stove cast gold along the walls. She took the glass, fingers brushing his, and sat at the edge of the cot, back straight, waiting. He sat across from her. After a long moment, he raised his glass. "To fences mended," he said. She touched hers to his. "And those torn down." They drank. Silence stretched between them again, but this time it had shape. It wasn't empty. It was full of breath, of things unspoken, of weight laid gently down. She looked at him, then not past him, not through him, but into him. And something softened behind her gaze, like a wound remembering how to be skinned. "I've known men who wanted to break me," she said, voice low. "To make me small, pretty, quiet." Elias didn't move. "You didn't," she continued. "You saw me, and you didn't look away." He swallowed. "I reckon I know what it feels like to be looked at wrong." Calla turned her glass slowly in her hands. "Back east, they said I was too much. Too strong for a girl. Too proud. I fought. Got sent place to place. Men kept trying to make me something they could carry, not something that could carry herself." She paused. "You ever try to stop being yourself just to survive?" Elias met her eyes. "Every day until you got here." The words surprised even him. She set her glass down. "It's strange," she whispered. "You give someone a piece of your story, and if they don't flinch, it feels like rain after a long dust." He stood, not to leave, but because he couldn't sit still anymore. The room was too full of her, of truth. He crossed to the window, looking out into the dark where the barn light flickered in the wind. "You've got more in you than most," he said. "And if this world can't find a place for that, then we'll make one." She didn't answer, but the way she stood beside him, close enough to feel, far enough to choose, spoke louder than words. Time passed. In the days that followed, they worked side by side. Replanted the west field, mended the windmill's rusted gears, built a new coop for the hens who'd started laying again. They talked now, softly, not about the past, but about the now, how the bees moved low before rain, how the creek carried pebbles farther than it should. Small truths that built something bigger. Then one morning, while the sky was pale with coming storm, she reached for the saddle. "I need to ride," she said. Elias nodded, though her eyes held more than just the need for air. "Where?" he asked. "Back," she said. "To the courthouse. To the name they tried to take." He stepped toward her, quiet. "You don't owe them anything." "I don't," she said. "But I won't stand where they last tried to make me small and know they didn't win." He didn't try to stop her, but he did saddle his own horse. She didn't argue. The town was 20 miles east. The trail wound through low valleys and hills too stubborn to flatten. They rode in silence, the kind that held hands. When they reached the edge of the main street, eyes turned. Of course they did. But Elias rode beside her, not ahead, not behind. She dismounted first. Walked up the courthouse steps. The doors stood open, sunlit and still. She stepped inside, boots echoing on the marble floor. Marin wasn't there. Only a clerk who looked up with recognition and a flicker of something like fear. "I want the record changed," she said. "I was not a vagrant. I was not property. I was a woman with no place left to go. Now I have one." The clerk stammered. I don't have the authority." She leaned forward. "Then find someone who does. Or I'll keep coming back until you do." The man nodded, scribbled, disappeared down a hallway. She turned. Elias waited just outside the door. When she stepped back into the light, there was no ceremony, no applause, but something in her spine had changed. She walked taller. They rode home in the quiet of late afternoon, the wind brushing past like approval. When they reached the ranch, Elias helped her down. "You're not just someone I saw," he said quietly. "You're someone I remember." She looked at him, then with something unguarded, unbroken. "And you're someone I choose." He didn't reach for her. He didn't have to. Somewhere overhead, a hawk cried into the open sky, and the land beneath them felt less like survival, more like belonging. The wind had always moved through that land like a second presence, restless, whispering, never staying long enough to know its name. It scattered seeds, stories, the scent of lilac from the grove near the ridge. But now and then, when everything aligned just right, it paused. And when it did, the silence left behind wasn't empty. It was whole. The morning came wrapped in that kind of stillness. Calla woke early, as she always did. The bunkhouse window caught the first breath of dawn, and she sat up slow, not because she was tired, but because something in the air told her the day would matter. There was no thunder in the distance, no menace, just that pause, that hush before life tilts in a new direction. She braided her hair loosely and left the door open behind her. Across the yard, Elias was already tending the fire, kettle hanging from the arm of the old black iron. He looked up when he heard her boots in the gravel. Didn't speak, just offered a tin cup full of warmth and quiet. They sat together on the porch, shoulder to shoulder, watching the light stretch across the land like a blessing. "It's different today," she murmured. He nodded. "Feels like something's finished without telling us." She sipped slow. "Or just begun." They didn't need to name it. Some truths live better without words. Later, while repairing the fence near the southern boundary, a rider approached. Dust rose behind him like an omen, but neither Elias nor Calla reached for the rifle. The man was young, lean in the way city men often are, with clean boots and a posture that said he still thought laws mattered more than people. He dismounted and approached with a paper in hand. "I come from a circuit office," he announced, barely nodding. "You Elias Wren?" "I am," Elias said. The man glanced at Calla. He held himself like he expected resistance. Instead, she simply met his gaze. "I've got here a release," he said. "Official notice from the district magistrate. Her record's been annulled. Charges dropped. Her placement nullified. She's no longer bound by any contract or claim." Calla didn't move. She didn't reach for the paper. Just stared at it like it was a snake sunbathing in her garden. Elias took it, scanned it slow, and folded it once. "Wasn't much of a claim to begin with," he said. The man hesitated. "I'm just here to deliver it." "Then you've done your part," Calla said, voice calm. He mounted again, clearly uncomfortable with the silence, and rode off without waiting for more. When the sound of hoofbeats faded, Calla looked to Elias. "It's over." He held the folded page in his hand, then tucked it into his back pocket. "It never should have begun." She didn't smile, but something unknotted in her brow. The space between them felt thinner. Not fragile, just open. They walked back to the house without speaking. Side by side, Elias let his fingers brush hers once, light as dust, and she didn't pull away. That afternoon, Calla saddled the mare again. Not to run, not to escape, but to ride. She asked Elias to come. He did. They rode toward the far field where the cottonwoods lined the dry creek bed, and the wind didn't reach so harsh. There was a grove there, small, quiet, long forgotten. Years ago, Elias had planted wildflowers there for his mother. He hadn't returned since. Calla dismounted first, walked into the tall grass like it knew her name. Elias followed, leaving reins loose over the saddle horn. She turned to him there, among the pale blue blossoms and the hum of bees. "I used to think I'd die before I found a place that didn't ask me to become something else." He didn't answer, just listened, the way he always did. She looked out over the field. "I don't need forever," she said. "I just need a patch of earth that sees me as I am." He stepped closer. "Then stay here. Not as someone I claimed. Not as someone I fixed. Just stay. As you." She met his gaze. In it, she saw the man who hadn't tried to soften her edges or fill her silences. A man who let her be both flame and soil. She breathed deep and felt like the first time her lungs had ever drawn something clean. "I will." And there, in that field where nothing had bloomed in years, something took root. Weeks passed. Calla began carving wood in the evenings, shaping old cedar into combs, bowls, handles. Elias read aloud sometimes from a leather-bound book he found in the attic. They spoke more now. Not constantly, but with depth. The kind of talking that plants things. The ranch began to hum again. Not loud, not proud, but steady. When a neighbor's foal fell ill, Calla rode out in the night and stayed until it could stand again. When the church bell broke in a summer storm, Elias rode into town and helped raise a new one. Neither did it for credit. They just did it because they were whole. In the evenings, they'd sit on the porch and watch the sun settle into the ridge, soft and golden. Sometimes she'd hum again. Sometimes he'd sing along, low and unsure, but she never laughed. One night, as the fireflies came up in waves and the crickets tuned their tiny strings, Elias turned to her. "You think we're lucky?" She thought a long time before answering. "No," she said, leaning into his shoulder. "I think we earned this." He nodded. The wind shifted once that night, then paused, and didn't stir again until morning. Somewhere in the hills, the past let go, and in its place, something beautiful settled down and stayed. Not loud, not sudden, just a quiet kind of forever.